Welcome to Lotus Light Teachings, where we explore timeless wisdom to illuminate modern lives. Today, we'll journey into a topic that touches all of us at some point. 5 things that drain your soul in old age and how to reclaim them. Let me ask you, have you ever felt a quiet heaviness in your heart, like the weight of time itself? Perhaps you've wondered why certain burdens linger, even as you grow older and wiser. Together, we'll unravel these mysteries using insights from Zen and Buddhist teachings, uncovering ways to rekindle the light within. Let's embark on this journey of self-discovery and transformation. Remember, this is not just my story or the wisdom of ancient teachings. It's our shared exploration of what it means to live fully, no matter our age. Picture this: a late autumn afternoon. The trees are half bare, their golden leaves scattered on the ground. An elderly man sits quietly on a park bench, gazing at the play of sunlight on the rippling water of a pond. His eyes seem to hold both the weight of years and the glimmer of unspoken wisdom. This man could be any one of us, someone reflecting on a life well lived, but also pondering the shadows of regret, fear, and change. Old age, as beautiful as it can be, often brings challenges that drain the spirit. Regrets about the past, fear of mortality, feelings of isolation, attachment to what no longer serves us, and resistance to inevitable change. These are the weights that many carry into their later years. But here's the truth: the soul is never truly diminished. Like the sun obscured by clouds, its light remains, waiting to shine through. So how do we clear the clouds? How do we reclaim the vitality of the soul and embrace the beauty of every moment? Together, let's delve into 5 profound lessons, drawing from the timeless wisdom of Zen and Buddhism. These teachings will not only help you reclaim the soul, but also guide you toward a life of lightness and fulfillment. 1. Regret over the past, transforming shadows into light. As the sun dips below the horizon, the shadows stretch long, casting the world in a muted, reflective light. Regret often feels like these shadows always lurking, growing heavier as time passes. It whispers of moments we can never reclaim, choices we wish we had made differently, and words we long to unsay. Regret is deeply human, an echo of our longing to rewrite the stories of our past. Yet, what if these shadows were not meant to bind us but to teach us? What if, instead of fighting regret, we could transform it into a source of wisdom and light? Regret often manifests as a loop in the mind, replaying the same scenarios over and over. It keeps us anchored to a version of ourselves that no longer exists, blinding us to the beauty of the present. This clinging to what could have been is one of the roots of suffering, as explained in the Buddhist teachings. Dukkha. The dissatisfaction or suffering that permeates life arises when we resist reality as it is. The past, unchangeable as it may be, holds valuable lessons if we approach it with mindfulness. In one of his discourses, the Buddha explained that our actions, or karma, shape our reality. This is not a punishment but a reminder of our agency. While we cannot alter the seeds we have already sown, we can choose how to tend to the garden of the present. Regret becomes a form of suffering only when we allow it to root us in self-blame and stagnation. Instead, it can be a guide, pointing us toward growth and understanding. Many of us carry regrets that feel insurmountable: paths not taken, relationships left unresolved, mistakes made in moments of weakness. These regrets can feel like heavy stones in the heart, weighing down the spirit. Yet, the Buddhist teachings remind us that we are not defined by a single action or moment. Life is fluid, ever-changing, and we have the power to respond to our past with compassion and intention. Consider the story of Kisa Gautami, a woman from the Buddha's time who was paralyzed by grief after the death of her child. Desperate to bring him back to life, she sought the Buddha's help. He told her to bring him a mustard seed from a household that had never experienced death. As she knocked on door after door, she found that no family was untouched by loss. This realization transformed her suffering into compassion, allowing her to let go of her regret and embrace the universal nature of pain. Kisa's journey teaches us that regret often stems from a sense of isolation, as though we alone have made mistakes or experienced loss. By recognizing the shared nature of human imperfection, we begin to release the weight of regret. I once knew a man named David, whose story has stayed with me as a powerful example of transformation. In his 70s, David often spoke about a career opportunity he had turned down in his 30s. At the time, it had seemed too risky, but as the years went on, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed his chance to fulfill his potential. This regret became a silent companion, casting a shadow over his accomplishments and joy. Through mindfulness practice, David began to approach his regret differently. Instead of replaying the decision with self-criticism, he asked himself, "What did this experience teach me?" He realized that the path he had taken instead had allowed him to develop skills and connections that enriched his life in unexpected ways. Inspired by this shift in perspective, David began mentoring young professionals, sharing his story as a way to help them navigate their own crossroads. In giving back, he found purpose and a sense of peace. His regret, once a source of pain, became a tool for growth. The process of transforming regret requires patience and self-compassion. It is not about erasing the past, but about changing our relationship with it. Each of us has moments we wish we could rewrite, but the power lies in the stories we choose to tell about those moments. Are they tales of failure, or are they lessons of resilience? Are they burdens, or are they stepping stones? Mindfulness offers a path to reframing regret. When we sit with our emotions rather than running from them, we begin to see them clearly. Regret is no exception. By observing it without judgment, we can uncover the wisdom it holds. What choices led to this moment? What values were we acting on at the time? What can we learn about ourselves from this experience? These questions guide us toward understanding rather than self-recrimination. A simple practice can help cultivate this perspective. Each morning, take a few minutes to write down one regret. Next to it, write a lesson it taught you. Perhaps a missed opportunity taught you the value of seizing the moment. Perhaps a harsh word taught you the importance of kindness. Conclude this exercise with the affirmation, "This lesson is my freedom." Over time, you'll notice a shift. The heaviness of regret begins to lighten, replaced by gratitude for the insights it has brought. The Buddha likened the mind to a garden, which flourishes when tended with care and intention. Regret, like a weed, can overrun this garden if left unchecked. But with mindfulness, we can transform even the weeds into nourishment. By understanding the causes and conditions that led to our past choices, we cultivate wisdom. By accepting our imperfections, we nurture compassion for ourselves and others. One of the most profound ways to move through regret is through acts of service. When we focus outward, using our experiences to uplift others, we transcend the limitations of our individual narratives. I once met a woman named Clara who had spent years regretting the estrangement from her daughter. Though she could not undo the past, she began volunteering at a youth center, mentoring young people who lacked parental guidance. Through this work, Clara found healing. She could not change her relationship with her daughter, but she could honor the lessons of her regret by giving to others. At its core, regret is a mirror reflecting our values. The pain of regret often points to what we care about most: relationships, integrity, growth. By examining this pain with curiosity and openness, we gain clarity about what matters to us. This clarity allows us to live more intentionally, aligning our actions with our values in the present. In modern life, where the pace of change often leaves little room for reflection, regret can feel like an anchor pulling us backward. Yet, it also holds the potential to ground us in the wisdom of our experiences. The teachings of the Buddha remind us that the past is not a prison but a teacher. When we embrace this perspective, we free ourselves to move forward with lightness and purpose. As you sit with your own regrets, consider this: what if they are not obstacles but guides? What if, instead of seeing them as reminders of what you've lost, you see them as signposts pointing toward what you can still create? The SH. Daos of regret may grow long as the sun sets, but they also remind us of the light that casts them. By facing these shadows with compassion, we transform them into a source of wisdom and strength, illuminating the path ahead. 2. Fear of mortality, embracing life cycles. There is a profound stillness that comes with sitting under the shade of a tree on a quiet afternoon. The rustling of leaves in the wind, the shifting shadows on the ground, and the gentle passage of time, these moments remind us of life's transient nature. And yet, for many, this realization stirs a fear that lies buried deep within. The fear of mortality. The inevitability of death looms larger as we age, casting shadows over our days and narrowing our focus to what we stand to lose rather than what we still have. The Buddha often spoke of impermanence, or anicca, as one of the three marks of existence. Everything that arises will eventually pass away, from the smallest flower to the grandest mountain. This truth, while initially unsettling, holds the key to liberation. When we stop resisting life's impermanence and instead embrace it, we discover a profound sense of peace. The peace that comes not from denying death, but from understanding it as a natural part of the cycle of existence. Fear of the unknown is one of humanity's oldest and most universal emotions. It is a thread that runs through all cultures, religions, and histories, binding us together in our shared vulnerability. Yet, the Buddha's teachings offer a way to transform this fear into wisdom. He taught that suffering arises not from the reality of death itself, but from our attachment to permanence, the desire to hold onto what cannot be held. This clinging creates tension, a quiet resistance to the flow of life. In Zen philosophy, there is a saying, "What is born will die. What is gathered will disperse." These words are not meant to evoke despair, but to remind us of life's beautiful fragility. Just as a flower blooms and withers, or a river flows endlessly toward the sea, every part of existence is in constant motion. To fear this cycle is to fear life itself. But what if, instead, we could see it as an invitation to live fully, to savor each moment as it comes? I once met an elderly monk named Venerable Tenzin who carried this wisdom in his every action. Each morning, he would walk through a forest near his monastery, his hands clasped gently behind his back, his gaze soft and contemplative. When I asked him what he thought about during these walks, he smiled and said, "Every fallen leaf reminds me of the beauty of letting go." He explained that the leaves, returning to the earth, nourish the soil, allowing new life to grow. This simple yet profound observation captured the essence of his teachings. Death is not an end but a transition, a return to the source. Tenzin's serenity came not from avoiding the reality of mortality, but from embracing it. He saw death as part of life's continuous cycle, no more or less significant than birth. This perspective freed him to live each day with profound presence, unburdened by fear or regret. Watching him, I was reminded of how often we let the fear of death overshadow the joy of living. But in truth, it is only by confronting this fear that we can truly appreciate the fleeting beauty of our time here. Nature offers countless lessons in impermanence if we are willing to observe. Imagine a single leaf falling from a tree, its descent slow and graceful. Carried by the wind, it lands softly on the ground, where it will eventually decompose and nourish the soil. From this soil, new life will emerge, a flower, a tree, a blade of grass. This cycle is not tragic but beautiful, a testament to the interconnectedness of all things. When we view our own lives through this lens, the fear of mortality begins to dissolve, replaced by a sense of awe and acceptance. This perspective aligns with the Buddhist concept of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. While many see this cycle as daunting, the Buddha taught that it is also an opportunity for growth and enlightenment. Each moment of life, no matter how fleeting, contributes to the greater whole. By recognizing this, we can find meaning even in impermanence. I remember a woman named Anna who struggled deeply with the fear of death after being diagnosed with a terminal illness. At first, she was consumed by anxiety, unable to think about anything other than the time she believed she had lost. But during her treatment, she began attending mindfulness classes where she learned to focus on the present moment. One day, she shared a profound insight. "I realized that every moment I spend fearing death is a moment I lose in living." Anna began to approach her days with a new perspective. She spent time with loved ones, wrote letters to friends she hadn't seen in years, and pursued hobbies she had long set aside. In embracing the reality of her mortality, she found a renewed sense of purpose. Her fear, once overwhelming, transformed into gratitude for the time she had. The practice of mindfulness is a powerful tool for navigating the fear of mortality. By bringing our attention to the present moment, we step out of the mental loops that keep us trapped in fear. Each breath becomes an anchor, a reminder that life is happening here and now, not in some imagined future. One effective exercise is to visualize the cycle of life. Sit quietly and imagine a single leaf falling from a tree. Picture its journey as it is carried by the wind, lands on the ground, and decomposes, becoming part of the earth. From this earth, imagine new life springing forth. As you visualize this cycle, repeat the affirmation, "I am part of this eternal flow." This practice helps to cultivate a sense of interconnectedness and acceptance, reminding us that death is not an end but a transformation. Another approach is to reflect on the impermanence of all things. Take a moment to observe the world around you, the changing seasons, the passage of time, the way the sunlight shifts throughout the day. These changes are not to be mourned but celebrated, for they are the essence of life itself. By embracing impermanence, we learn to let go of our need for control and find peace in the flow of existence. The Buddha once told a story about a man who was struck by a poisoned arrow. Instead of allowing the arrow to be removed, the man demanded to know who had shot it, why, and with what kind of bow. In his preoccupation with these questions, he delayed his own healing. This story serves as a metaphor for how we often approach life's uncertainties, including mortality. We become so consumed by our fears and questions that we miss the opportunity to live fully. The lesson here is clear. Rather than resisting the reality of death, we should focus on the life we have. Each moment is an opportunity to connect, to grow, and to experience the world with open-hearted wonder. The inevitability of death does not diminish life's value. It enhances it, reminding us to treasure what we have while we have it. In modern life, where the distractions of technology and routine often pull us away from deeper reflection, it can be challenging to confront the fear of mortality. Yet, the teachings of the Buddha and the practices of mindfulness offer a path forward. By cultivating presence and embracing the cycles of life, we can transform our fear into a source of strength and wisdom. As you sit with your own thoughts about mortality, consider this: what if death is not something to be feared but a reminder to live fully? What if, instead of focusing on what we might lose, we turned our attention to what we still have? In doing so, we might discover a profound sense of peace, a peace that comes not from denying the reality of death, but from embracing it as part of the greater cycle of life. 3. Isolation from others, rebuilding connections. There is a kind of silence that goes beyond the absence of sound. It's the silence of loneliness, a void that settles into the heart as connections fade and relationships shift. For many, especially as they age, this silence can become a persistent companion. Loved ones pass away, children grow distant, and social circles diminish. It's not just the physical absence of others that weighs heavy, but the disconnection from a sense of belonging, of being seen and understood. The Buddha's teachings remind us that isolation, while painful, is not inevitable. It can be transformed into an opportunity for reconnection, both with others and within ourselves. Loneliness is often described as a hollow ache, a longing for companionship that seems just out of reach. It's easy to feel invisible, as though the world continues to move without noticing the void within. This sense of disconnection is deeply human, but it is also deeply addressable. The Buddha understood this and emphasized the importance of Sangha, or spiritual community, as a foundation for a meaningful life. He taught that companionship not only alleviates loneliness but also nurtures wisdom, compassion, and purpose. Through connection, we rediscover the threads that tie us to the fabric of life. In the teachings of the Buddha, the interconnectedness of all beings is a central theme. Just as a tree cannot exist without the soil, sunlight, and rain, we, too, are shaped and sustained by our relationships with others. When these connections weaken, we may feel as though we are floating untethered. But the truth is that the threads are never fully severed. They simply need to be strengthened. Mary, an 82-year-old widow, once told me about her struggles with isolation after her children moved away. Her days became a monotonous cycle of sitting by the window, watching life go on without her. It felt like I was fading, she said. But one day, on a whim, she joined a community garden project. At first, she was hesitant, unsure of how to connect with others after so much time alone. But as she began tending to the soil, planting seeds, and sharing quiet conversations with fellow volunteers, something shifted. I came to give, she said, but I received so much more. Through shared laughter and the act of nurturing life, Mary found a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. Mary's story is a testament to the transformative power of connection. When we reach out, even in small ways, we create opportunities for growth, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. The Buddha often spoke of dana, or generosity, as a practice that cultivates joy and dissolves the barriers of isolation. Generosity doesn't have to be grand. It can be as simple as a kind word, a listening ear, or a shared moment of presence. The practice of metta, or loving-kindness meditation, offers another path to rebuilding connections. This meditation begins with cultivating compassion for oneself, then extending it outward to others. It reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles. Everyone, in their own way, is seeking happiness and freedom from suffering. By wishing for the well-being of others, we soften the walls of separation and open our hearts to the interconnectedness of all life. Imagine sitting quietly, breathing deeply, and repeating the phrases, "May I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be at peace." Once you feel this compassion for yourself, extend it to someone you care about. Then, extend it further to a neighbor, a stranger, even someone with whom you've had difficulties. This practice doesn't just alleviate loneliness. It transforms it into an opportunity for connection, reminding us that we are all part of the same human experience. The Buddha likened isolation to a single coal removed from a fire. When separated, the coal cools and its flame fades. But when it is returned to the fire, it reignites, burning brightly once more. This metaphor highlights the importance of community, not just for companionship, but for spiritual growth. In connection, we find the warmth of shared humanity, the spark of inspiration that keeps our inner fire alive. One of the most profound ways to overcome isolation is through service. Volunteering, mentoring, or simply offering your presence to someone in need creates a ripple effect of connection. I once knew a retired teacher named James who began tutoring children at a local library after feeling purposeless in his later years. At first, he saw it as a way to fill his time, but it quickly became much more. Their laughter, their curiosity brought me back to life, he said. In giving his time and knowledge, James found not only a way to connect with others, but also a deeper connection to himself. It's natural to feel hesitant about reaching out, especially after experiencing loss or rejection. The fear of vulnerability can create barriers that seem insurmountable. But as the Buddha taught, suffering arises from clinging to these barriers, from believing that isolation is safer than connection. By taking small, intentional steps, we can begin to dissolve these fears. Start by reaching out to one person, a neighbor, a family member, or an old friend. Even a brief conversation can reignite a sense of connection. Practice listening with presence, offering your full attention without judgment or distraction. The act of truly hearing someone is a profound gift, one that fosters intimacy and trust. Another powerful practice is gratitude. Reflect on the people who have touched your life, whether directly or indirectly. Write a letter of thanks, even if you never send it. This exercise not only strengthens your sense of connection, but also shifts your focus from what is lacking to what is present. Modern life, with its emphasis on independence and self-sufficiency, often undervalues the importance of community. Technology, while connecting us in many ways, can also deepen feelings of isolation by replacing genuine interaction with superficial exchanges. Yet, the teachings of the Buddha remind us that true connection is not about quantity but quality. A single heartfelt conversation can have a greater impact than 100 fleeting interactions. The concept of interbeing, as described by Thich Nhat Hanh, illustrates this beautifully. He wrote, "To be is to interbe. Just as a flower cannot exist without the sun, soil, and rain, we, too, are part of an intricate web of relationships. Recognizing this interconnectedness helps us see that we are never truly alone. We are always part of something greater. Loneliness, while painful, is not a permanent state. It is a call to action, an invitation to reach out and reconnect. The Buddhist teachings offer a roadmap for this journey, guiding us toward compassion, generosity, and presence. When we embrace these practices, we transform isolation into intimacy, disconnection into belonging. As you reflect on your own relationships, consider this: what small step can you take today to rebuild a connection? Perhaps it's a phone call, a kind gesture, or simply a moment of gratitude. In these small acts, we find the threads that bind us to one another, weaving a tapestry of shared humanity. May we all find the courage to reach out, the wisdom to nurture connection, and the compassion to see ourselves in others. In doing so, may we rediscover the joy of belonging not just to a community, but to the world itself. 4. Attachment to material possessions, finding freedom in simplicity. There is a quiet irony in the way we attach ourselves to things. We collect possessions as though they hold the essence of who we are, investing them with meaning and memory, yet they often become burdens instead of blessings. Over time, these objects that once brought joy or utility can start to define us, tethering us to a weight we don't even realize we carry. The Buddha's teachings on attachment illuminate this struggle, showing us that clinging to possessions is one of the many ways we create our own suffering. Imagine walking through life with a heavy bag on your back. At first, you fill it with essentials, things you genuinely need. But as you go along, you start adding more mementos, keepsakes, items that remind you of certain times or people. The weight grows heavier, and though you don't notice it at first, over time it begins to slow you down. This is the nature of attachment. We accumulate not just objects but the emotional significance we project onto them, making it harder to move freely through life. The Buddha described attachment as a kind of craving, a desire for things to stay as they are or for us to hold on to what we have. This craving is one of the roots of dukkha, or suffering, because nothing in life is permanent. The objects we cling to will fade, break, or disappear, just as we ourselves are impermanent. By understanding this truth, we begin to see that freedom lies not in holding tightly but in letting go. A retired teacher named Tom once shared his story with me. After his wife passed away, their home became a shrine to her memory. Her clothes remained in the closet, her favorite books lined the shelves, and even her teacups sat on the counter as though she might return at any moment. At first, these things brought Tom comfort, but over time, they became a source of pain. "I couldn't move forward," he said. "It felt like I was living in a museum of what once was." One day, Tom decided to donate her clothes to a local shelter. It was an act that filled him with both grief and relief. "It felt like a weight lifted," he told me. "I realized her love wasn't in these things, it was in the life we shared and the memories I carry." This realization allowed Tom to create space in his life, not just physically but emotionally. By letting go of what no longer served him, he made room for new experiences and connections. Tom's story is a powerful example of the Zen principle of emptying the cup. In Zen practice, this idea refers to the need to let go of preconceived notions, attachments, and clutter, whether mental or physical, to make space for clarity and growth. Simplicity is not about deprivation. It's about freedom. When we release the things that no longer serve us, we discover that we were never defined by them in the first place. Our attachment to material possessions often stems from a deeper desire for security and identity. We tell ourselves that having more will protect us from uncertainty or give us a sense of accomplishment. But the Buddha taught that true security and identity come not from external things but from inner peace and wisdom. He once asked his disciples, "Which is more important, the possessions you gather or the freedom to walk lightly through life?" This question invites us to reflect on the weight we carry, not just physical objects but the emotional attachments tied to them. Are we holding on to something out of fear of forgetting, or because we believe it defines us? And what would happen if we let it go? The story of the monk and the golden bowl illustrates this point beautifully. A monk was gifted a golden bowl, a rare and valuable item. At first, he treasured it, polishing it daily and keeping it safe. But soon, the bowl became a source of anxiety. He worried it might be stolen or damaged, and this fear consumed him. One day, he gave the bowl away, feeling an immediate sense of relief. "I thought the bowl brought me happiness," he said, "but it only brought me worry. Letting it go brought me peace." In today's world, where consumerism is often equated with success, the idea of letting go can feel counterintuitive. We are bombarded with messages that tell us to buy more, own more, and accumulate as a measure of our worth. But the Buddha's teachings remind us that the pursuit of more is endless and ultimately unsatisfying. True contentment comes not from adding but from subtracting. From simplifying our lives so that we can focus on what truly matters. One of the ways to begin this process is by examining our possessions with mindfulness. Take a single object in your home and ask yourself, does this bring me joy? Does it serve a purpose? If the answer is no, consider letting it go. This act of releasing is not about discarding things carelessly but about honoring them for the role they played and recognizing when it's time to move on. A woman I once knew, Clara, embraced this practice in a profound way. After years of collecting antiques, her home was filled with items that no longer brought her happiness but felt too significant to part with. Inspired by the teachings of simplicity, she began to let go of one item each week. "It was like peeling away layers of myself," she said. "With each object I released, I felt lighter, freer. I realized my life wasn't in these things. It was in the relationships and experiences I had neglected while clinging to them." Generosity, or dana, is another powerful antidote to attachment. When we give freely without expecting anything in return, we break the cycle of craving and clinging. The act of giving transforms not only the recipient but also the giver, fostering a sense of connection and abundance. This is why the Buddha emphasized generosity as a cornerstone of the spiritual path. Imagine taking a beloved item, a book, a piece of clothing, or a cherished memento, and giving it to someone who might need it more. This act not only lightens your load but also deepens your understanding of impermanence and interconnectedness. The joy of giving often outweighs the initial discomfort of letting go, reminding us that true wealth lies in the ability to share. The practice of simplifying our possessions is not just about decluttering our homes. It's about decluttering our minds and hearts. When we free ourselves from the weight of attachment, we create space for what truly nourishes us: meaningful relationships, personal growth, and the present moment. This process requires mindfulness, patience, and self-compassion, but the rewards are profound. As you reflect on your own life, consider this: what are you holding onto that no longer serves you? And what might you gain by letting it go? These questions are not meant to provoke guilt, but to inspire curiosity and transformation. The Buddha's teachings remind us that the freedom we seek is already within us, waiting to be uncovered. In the end, attachment is not about the things themselves, but about the stories we tell ourselves about those things. By rewriting these stories with mindfulness and compassion, we can begin to untangle the threads of attachment and discover the lightness of being. May we all find the courage to let go, the wisdom to live simply, and the clarity to walk lightly through this world. 5. Resistance to change, embracing life's flow. Change has a way of finding us when we least expect it. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, like the soft rustle of autumn leaves drifting to the ground. Other times, it crashes into our lives like a storm, uprooting everything familiar. For many, the instinctive reaction is resistance. We cling to what is known, to what feels safe, as though holding on tightly could keep the inevitable at bay. Yet, as the Buddha taught, life itself is a constant state of flux. Nothing stays the same, and it is in this impermanence that we can find profound freedom. If only we learn to flow with it. There is a tension that arises when we resist change, a tightening of the heart and mind. This tension, though rooted in fear, often blinds us to the opportunities for growth that change can bring. As we grow older, the weight of this resistance can feel heavier. The comfort of familiarity becomes a fortress, but one that can also imprison us. How, then, do we learn to embrace change with grace and openness, rather than fear? The Buddhist teachings remind us that suffering, or dukkha, arises when we cling to the illusion of permanence. In the Four Noble Truths, he explained that the root of this suffering lies in our attachments, our desire for things to remain as they are or as we wish them to be. Yet, the world is ever-changing, like a river that flows endlessly. Trying to stop the current only leads to struggle, but allowing ourselves to move with it brings peace. In one of the Buddha's parables, a man comes to a river he must cross. At first, he resists the journey, overwhelmed by the uncertainty of what lies on the other side. But as he observes the water, he notices how it moves effortlessly around obstacles, never clinging to one place. Inspired, he builds a raft to carry him across. This story illustrates the principle of Wu Wei, or effortless action. A key teaching in Zen philosophy. It is not about passivity, but about aligning with the natural flow of life rather than fighting against it. I once met a woman named Eleanor, who had spent decades in a stable, predictable routine. Her days were filled with familiar comforts: her morning tea, her garden, her favorite books. But when her husband passed away, her world was turned upside down. For months, she resisted the changes this loss brought, refusing to let anyone move his belongings or alter their shared space. "If I let go," she said, "it will feel like he's really gone." One day, Eleanor found herself in her garden, watching the wind sway the branches of an old oak tree. She noticed how the tree bent gracefully, yielding to the gusts without breaking. It struck her that she had been standing rigid against the winds of change, and in doing so, she had been breaking inside. Slowly, she began to let go, not of her love for her husband, but of the need to keep everything exactly as it had been. She started planting new flowers, creating a space that honored both her memories and her present. Eleanor's journey mirrors the Zen teaching of resilience through flexibility. A tree that bends with the wind survives the storm, while one that resists is more likely to break. In the same way, embracing change does not mean surrendering to chaos. It means adapting, growing, and finding strength in our ability to evolve. Nature has much to teach us about the beauty of impermanence. Consider a river flowing over rocks. The water does not resist the obstacles in its path. It simply moves around them, finding the easiest course. It adapts without hesitation, carving new pathways over time. This is the essence of Wu Wei. When we resist change, we become like stagnant pools, trapped and unable to move forward. But when we flow with life's currents, we discover new landscapes, new possibilities. This principle became clear to me during a challenging period in my own life. I had spent years building a career that felt secure and predictable, only to face an unexpected job loss. At first, I was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty.